Hi guys, it's Mrs. Bottemiller. Hey, I want to start this video by saying great job on the writing work that you've done so far. You know, we started by comparing writing to like a sport or any other activity where you do a lot of practice before you enter into the first game. And we've been doing our practicing, right? You started by coming up with story seeds or ideas or events that might work for a personal narrative, right? When you did favorite people, places, and emotions. Then you took some of those story seeds and started kind of doing some mini writes to build some writing stamina. And so now we're kind of ready to move into the first game, right? And we did that by yesterday, Mrs. McDermott presented Everything Will Be Okay, which, wow, what a story, huh? Holy cow, that's a tough one. And you thought about, you know, what is actually a personal narrative. So now you kind of have in your mind, well, what it is. It's right, telling a story about something that happened. But how do you choose an event that's going to really work well for a personal narrative, right? You'd hate to pick an event and start writing about it and get halfway through and then be like, this story wasn't a good choice. This event wasn't a good choice, right? Because it's really boring or it doesn't seem to go anywhere. So today's lesson is about how do you choose a really good event that's going to make a good personal narrative. So I think there are kind of four things to consider when you're choosing an event, okay? You want an event where something happens, right? There has to be a beginning, middle, and end, or your story is going to be mighty boring. Also, there's got to be some sort of conflict. If there's no internal or external conflict, again, it's just going to be a really dull story. A third thing that makes a good event, oh, hello, my dog is coming to join us. I cannot escape you guys, the family or the pets. Hello. She might be the best looking thing in this video. I'm pretty sure that's true. Okay. The third thing that I think makes a really good narrative is, or a really good event, I mean, for a narrative, is that you learn something, right? When you think back at the event, you had some sort of revelation or realization because that kind of shows that the event was meaningful to you. And lastly, you know, an event should have a strong emotion as part of it, right? Either great joy or fear or anger or frustration, right? Because I think it's going to make a better narrative if there's a strong emotion. So I was thinking about how can we kind of put some events to the test before we invest, you know, a week or a week and a half of writing about them. And so I thought, you know, if we made a plot line of an event, kind of like a little mini story, could we tell whether or not the event was going to work for a personal narrative? So what I did is I created a little plot line using Everything Will Be Okay, yesterday's story, which we know is a great personal narrative, a really great personal narrative. Also, he's a professional writer, so it should be. But if we put that story on a plot line, could we tell that that was going to make a good personal narrative? So when I put this story, Everything Will Be Okay, on a plot line, here's what it looks like, right? Remember, James finds the kitten, he brings it home. Mom's not so sure about the kitten, wants him to put it on the porch. He kind of connects with the kitten, names it, tells him the doctor or the vet will fix him. And then, you know, he and his brother drive to the vet's office where unfortunately, you know, the sad, oh gosh, part of the story, you know, he sees the cat being gassed by his brother, you know, then they go home and he has to sit across from his brother and eat dinner at the family table. And then he kind of has this like aha moment at the very end of the story. So if we go back to our kind of test questions, now that we've laid it on a plot line, we can see, does something happen? Well, yeah, look at the plot line. There's definitely stuff that goes on in the story. Is there a conflict? Well, yes, there's the external conflict of, you know, him wanting to save the cat and his family not wanting to do that. But also there's kind of an internal conflict that he has where he, you know, wants to be like his brothers and his dad and wants to please them, but he realizes that he's not like them. This event taught him that, which kind of leads us into the third question. Does he learn something? Yeah, he does learn something about himself. that he can forge his own path and he doesn't have to follow in his dad and father's footsteps. And finally, is there strong emotion in the story? Ooh, holy cows, was there strong emotions, right? It's very difficult to read. That feeling of loss is so strong, and we can all relate to that. So it really stood up to the test of, these answering these questions. Is the story worth telling? And yes, he would have known that had he done this sort of. So when we kind of answered those questions, that story, kind of stood up to our little test. Well, of course, he's a professional author, right? It's going to be a good story. So I thought, what if we tried this little test with a student's story? So what I found for you is I went back in my archives and I found a story that was actually written by a student. And let's see if we could answer yes to all of those questions for this student story. Okay, now here's the student story. The title is One Memory of Elementary School, which, terrible title, very boring. We'll be talking about titles later on in the process of writing your personal narrative. But here's his story. One memory I have from elementary school is when I was in 3rd or 4th grade. I brought fireworks to class. I was outside at recess and I put my hand in my pocket and felt something weird, and I saw them and they were bottle rockets and took them out and showed people. Then the teacher saw them and she said, "What are those?" And I said, "Fireworks." Then she said, "Give them to me and call your parents." She called my dad. And when I got home, he wasn't mad because he was the one who put the fireworks in my pocket. When the DNR officer came our way, he put them there and said we didn't have any fireworks. Okay, so let's put this story to the test, okay? I put it on a plot line. I put the events on a plot line. Okay, basically, he brings fireworks and shows the kids. The teacher sees them and calls Dad. Dad wasn't mad. Okay, does something happen? Well, yes, but this plot line is pretty slim. Not much happens. So yeah, something, but it's not a very meaty story, okay? Is there a conflict? Well, I guess the teacher, sees the fireworks and calls Dad, okay, but we don't really feel much about the conflict because he doesn't tell us very much about it. Now, does the main character learn something? If he does, he never mentions it. And is there strong emotion? There is zero emotion in this. You don't feel that he was scared or nervous or upset when he had the fireworks, or when the teacher caught him, or when the teacher was going to call his dad. There is basically no emotion anywhere in this story. So does this event really work as a personal narrative? It might have, but he certainly didn't do a very good job telling the story. So maybe in hindsight, he might have chosen to pick another story to write about if he had done kind of this test before starting to draft his version of his narrative. So to avoid getting halfway through the story and realizing your event wasn't a good story to write about, I want you guys to put a couple stories to the test. Okay, so here's what you're going to do. You're going to go back and look at your story sheets, okay? The writing that you've done in your writing notebook so far, right? Looking back at people, places, events. You might look at those little mini stories you wrote last week, and you're going to pick 2 of them that you think are good stories, right? That might work for your personal narrative. And so what you're going to do is you're going to put them on a plot line, and you're going to see if you can answer yes to all of these questions, right? The plot line will prove whether or not something happens. It will also prove whether or not there's a conflict. If you can't, you had no realization, or that there was no lesson learned as a result of this event, maybe not your best choice. And lastly, is there strong emotion? I think you'll know that if you go through the process of putting your story on a plot line. So again, you are going to choose 2 different events, and you are going to create a plot line for each one of these events. So in your notebook, you can just, kind of divide it, draw a line halfway down the sheet and put 1 plot line at the top, 1 plot line at the bottom. Again, if you hardly have any events, are you going to be able to tell a story that, a good personal narrative? If there's no problem, is that story going to work? No. If you didn't learn anything, is it going to work? Probably not. And obviously, if you don't have a strong emotional connection, we know it's not going to work. Your story is going to be really boring. So that's your writing work for today. 2 plot lines about 2 different events. And then hopefully you'll be able to see which event you think is going to work the best. And then you're going to move forward with that story, starting to draft a personal narrative. So have fun kind of going back through those memories that you listed last week and the week before. Choose 2 and have fun kind of deciding whether or not you think they're going to work for a personal narrative. Okay, off you go.